place to start, though, is Abid and I, my colleague Abid Chaudhry and I, are going to be going over some of the insights and data to set the stage for our great speakers that are coming up. So we're going to have 3 different segments, us, and then 2 separate panels on kind of subsectors of this overall call monetization topic. So Abid and I first are going to really talk about what BI/Kelsey is seeing in terms of data, in terms of usage trends that really set the stage for this overall call monetization opportunity. And this is something we're really sinking our teeth into. We've written several papers. This only in the last year, 2 papers we wrote. Phone calls, the new ad currency of the smartphone era. Phone calls are the new click. That's kind of a term that you'll hear a lot, and we've branded, and Abid's going to go into that in a little while. And there's certainly a theme there. So a good place to start to talk about or preempt the call monetization opportunity is to examine some of the market factors that are compelling it. And one of those is mobile growth. So we do a mobile ad forecast. I do this twice a year. This is the most recent one. We see mobile ads in the US going from 13.25 billion last year up to almost 42 billion in 2019. Now, the location-targeted portion of that ad spend last year, or sorry, it's still 2014, I guess. It's almost going to be last year, is 32%, growing to 43% by the end of our forecast period. And there are lots of reasons for that that are a whole different story that we spend a lot of time talking about and writing about. The reason I bring it up here as it relates to this topic is that we subdivide that by format. So clearly the story here is that search is the format that is getting the most amount of ad dollars in mobile. That has a lot to do with its high intent-based use case, its pull orientation, and those things tend to drive higher premiums, higher click-through rates, and other kind of performance deltas. But the reason that's brought up here is that search and our conversation today, which is call monetization, really go hand in hand. It's really a kind of a logical handoff in a lot of search use cases to drive a call, especially from the mobile device. So search as a category and as its growth is really a leading indicator of the growth we're going to see in the call monetization sector. Now, that's actually proving out my hypothesis that search and calls go together through lots of data sets we're seeing. This seems to be not advancing. There we go. Google reports that 70% of mobile searchers have launched a phone call, from the results set. And if you look at that according to the frequency, the majority of those calls are happening with their 2 top box score rating, with either always or frequently. So that's my hypothesis. Mobile search equals calls to business. And that gets back to our kind of a phraseology around the call is the new click. Abid, what do you think about that? That's actually the name of your segment that we're going to hear from you in a bit.
Absolutely. And looking at the screen, 70% of mobile searchers have used the call button. That's the most clear proof that the click is being bypassed in lieu of this new concept of just being able to click directly through your mobile device straight to whoever you're calling.
And it's the new click in being a currency of the kind of ad buying ecosystem. And being increasingly valued by advertisers, as we'll see in a second. Another interesting data point, this comes from our forecast. We use lots of different inputs in our forecasting, and this pegs call volume, which is a good kind of foundational point to this whole opportunity. Call volume to businesses driven from mobile search is going to reach 72 billion by 2018. And the important part about this is that this is really going to signal a requirement for businesses to adopt all of the different systems and platforms that we're going to be going over in the next hour or so. The ability to better track, analyze, and monetize calls is really compelled almost as a necessity by this volume of calls. And that happens interestingly, in both kind of marketing contexts, is how we usually talk about it, in the lead scoring and ROI assessment, but also the lesser known topic at operational levels. To be able to, route calls accordingly, and customer service contexts, and a lot of things like that. So these calls, interestingly, not only are they happening to high frequency, and it's a numbers game where we're looking at a lot of quantity, but also another point here is the quality of the call. So the calls are coming in at a part of the purchase funnel that it's a high value lead because it's high intent, lower funnel, as we say. And that is the type of lead that advertisers want. So speaking of the types of leads advertisers want, Abid, tell us about our local Commerce Monitor SMB survey data.
Sure. So, what's interesting to what Mike is saying, and that is what we're finding that correlates to the mobile and the call sort of relationship is that when we go and ask our small businesses through our local Commerce Monitor survey, which of the leads that you actually get are the most valuable, and which are the ones that you actually want the most in terms of quality, and which ones are the best, we find that outside of the online forums and emails and the clicks and impressions that might come through an online campaign, it's still in person, but also interestingly, more than in person, it's the calls themselves that are the most valuable that businesses want. 64.4% saying that they preferred the quality of the calls themselves over any other lead type. And I think that's indicative of what that means in terms of the intent and the purchase funnel story that you're talking about.
Yep. They know it's a high value call. It's also a lot about perception. It's very tangible to them.
That's right.
To answer the phone, right?
That's right.
Yeah. So drilling down one level, there's a vertical breakdown that's interesting to this too.
And what's cool about this one is that it takes the ability to see the calls themselves as a lead form, but then breaks it down into different types of vertical markets. And what we're finding is that across all the different verticals or categories that most of you in this room would already understand to be the top verticals themselves in terms of what a small business or any sort of business would really think would be high quality, that we're looking across the spectrum: financial services, home and trade and craftsman services, professional services. They all seem to say that the calls themselves are of the best quality or excellent to good quality, and that's what they would prefer.
And you're right. I hadn't thought of that this indicates a broad applicability.
That's right.
But also in some of these categories, if you pinpoint some of these are the high value categories traditionally in local media. We're talking financial services, home services, professional services, basically lots of services, which makes sense because they close business and appointments over the phone.
That's right. And and what we're going to talk about in the latter half of this session is we're going to hear about within these different vertical markets, how are companies that are in this audience and on a stage today, how are they actually enabling both the pre-sale call delivery as well as the post-sale analytics to make these folks that are in this different vertical spaces satisfied with a higher ROI, which has been a challenge.
And higher ROI in clarity in ROI, and making it apparent to them, which is kind of the name of the game.
That's right.
So further in support of the value of these leads coming in, this is data from Google. The mean price point at which customers are likely to call a business to make a purchase or a transaction, we're talking about high dollar volume conversions. So again, not only quantity but quality. These are high leads, and really the implication is, will this demand start to compel premiums on these types of leads? And a great point you made yesterday when we were talking was, the potential that this demand will in some ways normalize the volatility we see sometimes in cost per lead marketplaces.
That's right. And also it'll necessitate a lot of deep diving and scrubbing of the actual inventory of calls themselves. For a long time, publisher partners, reseller partners, anyone that's purchasing calls has had to deal with a standard that has been a lot lower. I think we had a statistic, it was 19%. I don't know if that's in here or not.
We'll show that in a minute, but yeah, you can bring it up now
too. That's right,
that
19% of the calls that are delivered are considered good calls to any given purchaser of calls, and that's pretty low when you think about the flood of calls that are being delivered in. And so it necessitates a conversation about both the inventory as well as the analytics.
Absolutely, and optimizing that and getting that higher. So this leads up to the overall market opportunity. So as part of our data, we pinpoint the total call-based advertising market, or actually this figure, I should qualify this more. This is a somewhat of a broad figure, but the dollars that are going towards media whose intention is to make the phone ring is a $65 billion marketplace, and that includes lots of the media we cover. That's not necessarily the size of the cost per lead or cost per click marketplace, pound for pound, but this is more of a larger addressable market of the dollars that are going towards that with the intent of driving phone calls. So here's your 19% figure.
There it is.
And I'm glad you brought that up because we're talking about this opportunity, and this is kind of like a glass half full, half empty moment where 20% of the calls are good, so that means the rest of them are what we call junk calls there, or solicitations, or calling for directions and things like that.
All sorts of different
But
issues.
really, the glass half full part is that this really compels all the things that we're going to be talking about in the next hour or so, because the need to separate the good calls from the bad calls on two different levels. And I alluded to this earlier. One, in a kind of marketing context, for lead scoring after the fact, to be able to know your ROI, which calls were good, and then iterate your market accordingly. But on that second operational level, in real time, to be able to route calls accordingly, in a customer service context, for example. And that goes for large businesses that are optimizing millions of incoming calls, but also busy small proprietors.
Yep.
They don't have the time to be doing all these other
nor the budget to be able to handle
79%
That's
or
right.
71% of calls.
That's
81,
right.
excuse me. I can't do math.
Oh, I'm glad you did that.
Clearly. But also, so this essentially is a good segue to our next segment on call analytics, but this also foreshadows your segment we're going to see in about a half an hour. Tell us about that.
So what we're going to be seeing, or what we're going to be talking about, is using this graph as sort of the starting point, is that now that we're looking at calls being sort of established as the replacement for the click, and there's a lot of substance behind the idea of a call, we need to start thinking about both the inventory and quality of calls as they come in, and also what to do once the call comes in terms of the organization that you're representing, whether it's the marketing organization, the sales organization, or any sort of component that would have to do with optimizing ROI from the analytic perspective.
Yep.
And so we're going to talk to 3 leaders in the space that are actually doing that.
Nice. Well, we'll see you in a half an hour to do that.
All right.
So join me in thanking Abid. We'll hear from him soon.